Did we lose this one? Okay. It is now in order to consider log 1115, amendment by Mr. Lamborn. For what purpose does Mr. Lamborn seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for the purpose of explaining his amendment.
And I will be very brief. This is a simple amendment which calls for transparency. A very similar amendment just passed the Democratic-controlled Senate Armed Services Committee. My amendment will simply require DoD government contractors to disclose their, quote, equal opportunity, equity, inclusion, or tolerance training materials, unquote, so we can provide appropriate oversight. There needs to be more and better transparency and accountability in all aspects of defense contracting. With that, I ask for a yes vote. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Is there any further debate? I have one question. When you say government contractors, are you talking about private sector folks, or who are we talking about here?
Anyone who does contracting with DoD and is using taxpayer dollars for those contracts, with DoD only.
Okay, so you're not talking about like if Lockheed Martin has to, you're talking about people who contract specifically to provide.
No, that would be the Lockheed Martins of the world.
Okay. Yeah, I will oppose this amendment just because it's not really that simple if you're requiring every private entity out there to disclose how they do their HR. I think that is an incredibly burdensome thing to lay down upon people and will not help. So I'm opposed.
Would the chairman yield for a second?
Actually, I want to get to Mr. Carbajal first, and we'll get back to you in a second here. Mr. Carbajal is recognized.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This proposal is yet another unnecessary amendment that feigns hysteria over employers' efforts to provide diversity and inclusion training to their employees. My colleagues across the aisle, my friends, are now targeting defense contractors, training materials that seek to help their employees be more mindful of their fellow employees. Employees who may come from a different background than them and have different life experiences. This amendment, coming from a self-proclaimed government, limited government party, is government overreach at its best or at its finest, hypocritical and misguided. I'm afraid that this continued drumbeat is only going to polarize race relations in our military and have far-reaching consequences for our readiness and national defense. I remind us that today we enjoy a volunteer, diverse military. After a while, people of color are not going to feel welcome or valued in our military. That's the implication of this continued drumbeat. This worn-out debate over race relations, some people call it critical race theory, as part of a cultural war, is and has always been intellectually dishonest. I urge my colleagues to please vote no on this amendment.
Dr. Descharlet.
Because Mr. Lamborn was so brief, I'd like to yield a little more time to him.
And just to clarify, this is not the military. This is private industry who have government contracts. That's point number one. Point number two, what is wrong with disclosure? We're just asking in this amendment for disclosure. What's there to be afraid of? Is there anything to be afraid of with disclosure? If there is, let me know what it is, and then vote no. But I'm curious as to what is so bad about disclosure. And I would yield to anyone who wants to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Lamborn, for yielding. What's wrong with requiring or asking people to disclose their vaccinations? And I only bring that, it's so far out there because that's been part of the concern of mandating that people be able to do that or not. The same thing here. This is private industry, but just because they contract with the department and the military services, again, we're overreaching to, again, continue this drumbeat of race relations and so-called critical race theory. I yield back.
And I yield back to the gentleman from Tennessee. I'm done. Thank you.
I yield to Ms. Bice, unless you want to be recognized by yourself.
Mr. Brown.
Ms.
I'm sorry, did you yield back? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll yield my remainder minute and a half to Ms. Bice.
Thank you. To my esteemed colleague, can you tell me how many DoD contractors you believe would have to submit their HR information to meet these requirements, and who specifically would they be sending this information to? Thank you.
To answer that question, it would be anyone who has a big, anyone who has a contract directly with the Department of Defense. It's described in paragraph 1 on first page of the bill. And
if I may, though, do you have any numbers as far as how many companies you're asking to report this information?
No, I don't.
If I may, if I go to that, I mean, think of every company that has a defense contract, you know, large and small. And that was my point. That's what's wrong with disclosure here. I mean, I've got some very small companies in my district who are now going to have to submit their HR report in addition to bidding on defense contracts. This is incredibly burdensome to the private sector. And that's not the only thing wrong with it, but it's one of the big things. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Brown is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose this. I think this is clearly, obviously, to suggest that diversity training is somehow problematic. Therefore, we should highlight it, and we need to scrutinize it because there's something inherently wrong. But picking up on the point that I think Ms. Bice raised in her question, as well as you, this isn't just defense contractors. This is Georgia Tech. They've got a contract. And you know how many courses and syllabi, et cetera, they have? This is MIT. This is Johns Hopkins Medical Center and Research. This is everyone that receives dollars from the government because in some form or another, it's an agreement and a written document that could be interpreted as a contract with the government. So you talk about burdensome. I don't even think Congress and the department, if we spend 365 days a year doing nothing but collecting this data, we'd have the capacity to do that. I mean, what you're asking for is a mountain of paperwork. You have nothing in this amendment to provide the resources to the department to gather this data, to analyze the data, to report the data. This isn't just a handful of maybe prime contractors that are affected. You're talking about the small contractors in every one of our districts who are already having difficulty complying with so many requirements when it comes to whether it's supply chain security or anything else. They're having to now respond. You're talking to every academic institution that gets a research grant. And they're not just, the way that this is written, they're not just responding to, well, what is their diversity, equity, inclusion training in their HR departments. The way this is written, it applies to their entire curriculum. So every professor is going to be looking through their curriculum, and they're going to be reporting on what the assignments that they give in their class to their students about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's poorly drafted, it's ill-conceived, it's misguided, it's underfunded, it's out of order, its time has not come, and I don't think it ever will. I yield back the balance of my time.
Ms. Hartzler. It's just on the sheet in front of me. Ms. Spear. Also not here. Okay. Not sure I'm looking at here. Sorry. Ms. Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, on the face of it, when you read this, who doesn't want transparency? We want to make sure that we're being forthcoming. And you read the contents about what it is they're seeking. If I believed that this was a good faith effort that wanted to promote diversity and equity and inclusion, I would say, what a great idea. Let's do this. And let's reward people who want to do that, because that's the direction that this country is moving. But unfortunately, I feel as though this is really a manufactured grievance that is seeking to divide. If we think about what it means to have diversity, equity, inclusion, it's something that makes this country stronger. It is something that makes organizations stronger, better decision making. And let me go there and talk about critical race theory, because it has become something that's become weaponized as a way to divide people. As a nation, we should not fear intellectual curiosity or learning our history. As a nation, we should not fear embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you look at the makeup of the military, it is one of the most diverse organizations on the planet. And when I think about what this means and what we're trying to do, it's not about rewarding people for having DEI, it's a way to be punitive. And so I am a hard no, I will not be supporting this. I also want us to remind ourselves that as a nation, we strive to be a more perfect union. We should learn from our past, and we should always strive to be better every day. And that has to start with the DoD and the people with whom we do business. So I'm going to vote no on this amendment, and I will yield back my time.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, all those in favor of the amendment will say aye. All those opposed will say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Noes have it, the amendment is defeated. It is now in order to